I struggled a lot more in those early years than I needed to because the money mindset thing, it felt weird to charge what would have been a month or 2 months salary for a single project. It just felt uncomfortable. And I think I undervalued myself a lot early on. And if I could go back and like shake the shoulders of, 2015, 16 Melanie who was starting out, I would have been like, Up your prices right away."
Hey, it's Nick, and welcome to 1000 Rounds, the podcast where I explore the stories of solopreneurs who have made the bet on themselves to build a business that serves their life. Every episode, you'll hear all about the lessons they've learned and the uncommon routes they've taken to stand out in a world that is purposefully trying to commoditize them.
I'm Melanie Deziel. I'm a speaker, author, and forever student.
I love to start these things off with how I first became familiar with you and your work. And when I was the director of marketing at an agency, our content director, this was a few years ago now, and she was like, "Hey, someone I went to school with wrote this really cool book called the Content Fuel Framework." And I was like, neat book. Thanks for bringing it up. Like, I'll check it out. It's just a moment that happened in passing. And then like fast forward a few years later, I was like getting more familiar with Jay's work, and The Kitchen came out, and I started looking into that. And then I realized like you were part of that. And all of a sudden, like all of these light bulbs started turning. I was like, wait a minute, this is the same person. Like this book. Oh my gosh, all this happened. Shout out to Ramona Sukraj, who was the director of content at the time. She knew before anyone knew that this was legendary work. And then when Prove It came out, once again, she was like, "You're sleeping on this book. You got to read this thing." So definitely very few degrees of separation. But even beyond the legendary books you've written, I first got to really start to know you in The Kitchen and through the office hours. And the more I learned about what you have been doing before you partnered up with Jay has been super interesting to me. So I want to take some time and kind of unpack what you have done, because you've been at it like, what, 9 years now?
Yeah, coming up on 10.
I know you were a journalist beforehand. What was your turning point? What motivated you to leave W-2 work and go solo almost 10 years ago now?
It is not something I ever probably would have thought of on my own. Going to school for journalism, like, it's freelancing and solopreneur, like, it's a big thing now. That was never on the radar as a discussion when I was in J school. It was like, you go work for a newspaper, hopefully you move to a bigger newspaper, maybe you make it in TV. Like, that was the trajectory. I mean, I never would have thought that, honestly. I just didn't see the model. But I was working at the New York Times, and then I moved over to Time Inc., and I had a pretty sweet gig. I was the director of creative strategy for all 35 US magazines. So all the sponsored content programs, I was, conceiving of those, pitching, overseeing, all that stuff. But in late 2014, my dad got really sick unexpectedly. I'll preface this by saying he's fine, so you don't have to hold your breath for the next minute. But had a number of brain surgeries that I was out of work for about 2 months. And I had this realization that I was such a cog in a machine. After a few days of getting coverage for various things, like, it didn't matter that I was gone, And in one way, that was great. It was like, cool. I've equipped my team. Like, I built this team. They're off and running. But on the other hand, I thought, like, you have those moments of your own mortality of like, life is so short. Do I want to live the rest of my life like that? Do I want to be in a quiet corner office where I am not really needed and I'm just comfortable? And the answer was no. I didn't necessarily know what came next, but my now husband, we were dating at the time, and he's an entrepreneur, like, through and through. And so he kept kind of encouraging, like, you could do this yourself. Like, you could teach people this stuff. You could do the strategy work on your own. And it took him reminding me pretty frequently to like really wrap my head around the idea of myself as a business. So it was a number of different things, like facing my mortality of like, watching my dad get sick, and then coming around to my now husband just really pushing like, this can be done. You can be on your own and have a bigger impact and control your fate a little more, for me to really start to think about making that leap. But it was scary. It was not something I had personally had a model for.
Social media wasn't really at the scale and maturity that it is today to even see other people really doing it. So what were some of the things that were scary about it?
I mean, I think the scariest thing for me is I have very much had to adjust to the blessing that has been my life growing up. Studying journalism, like, you don't go into it for the money. It's not lucrative. You don't make good money, or you certainly didn't in like the print era. So I was never super motivated by that. So it was a hard mental adjustment for me to think about, well, if it's not a salary, like having to quantify what my work is worth, having to be okay with putting out a proposal that has numbers that look absolutely redonkulous to me because that's what the market dictates, you know? So that was like a mental adjustment. I really had to switch on my money mindset to be comfortable having those conversations. But the other thing is my anxieties about it allowed me to prepare. So I knew I was going to leave and start my own thing about 6 months before I did. And I very quietly started to like get all my ducks in a row, do my website, get a newsletter going, which is crazy to think about now cuz like newsletters were not as everyday of a thing as they are now at that point, like building a list, lining up speaking gigs. So I had a lot of time to prepare so that when the time came, I felt comfortable because it wasn't like from all to nothing. It was like I had already laid a lot of the groundwork to make it a smooth landing. So thankfully, any of the stress around that drove me to prepare.
Right now, everyone seems to believe that if you post on LinkedIn enough, you can build a business. And it is kind of true. A lot of people have been able to pull that off. But this wasn't really the thing 9, 10 years ago. So, like, what did you do? How did you do it?
Having worked at the New York Times and to some degree Time Inc., I had had a lot of contact with brands, with agencies, you know, with other media companies. And so I was really blessed to have been in a position to build a network. So when the time came, I could reach out to people who could hire me directly and say, hey, love this project we worked on together. I'm on my own now. What kind of projects do you have coming up? So in that regard, it kind of set itself up. I didn't necessarily have a model to follow. I've never prospected on social the way that a lot of people have. If anyone's listening to this and then you go try to find me on LinkedIn or wherever or Instagram, like I haven't posted in a while. That's just not how I've used social. I've used it as a tool for connection, but not in like a relationship building to build my business way, but like a genuinely, I know these people and enjoy talking to them, real life person way. It's always been about networking for me and showing what I know and letting that speak for itself. That is not a sound business strategy. I'll just clarify. This is not like a build it and they will come sort of thing. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Just like be good and business will happen. But because I did a lot of speaking and I was guesting on a lot of podcasts, it was sort of inbound and networking, just the people that I have gotten to know through all of this. I mean, that's how Jay and I met. Jay and I met at a speaker dinner for an event we were both speaking at. And so kind of putting myself in those positions as best I can to network with folks and just do a good job in front of as many people as possible. And so far, that's kept the lights on.
You highlight a really important thing here that is very non obvious to me when I first went out on my own was like everyone's so focused now on build an audience, and an audience and a network are very different things.
I mean, even like Ramona, like you were saying earlier, Ramona wasn't like this girl that I follow on Twitter wrote a book. It was like, no, we went to school together. We knew each other. So, like, when we're keeping up with each other on social, it's more genuinely congratulating you on the new job and like knowing that you got a new dog or whatever. Like, you know, it was a real connection that we happened to stay in touch. She and I actually messaged on LinkedIn, speaking of, a decent amount, but it was more like talking shop about content stuff and like, hey, did you see this and stuff like that. But yeah, I always preface it by recognizing the privilege because I know how it sounds to say like the first step is to just have an amazing network from working at the New York Times, like as if that's something you can like buy on Etsy. But you know, it's important, you know, to kind of keep those relationships as best you can. If you know you are going to go solo, like if you're listening to this before then that's something to think about in advance. Like I have taken projects and worked with clients, not because of the value that that project gave me, but because of the people it would put me in touch with, the people I could work closer to who then can become part of that network, if it makes sense.
There's probably plenty of people who worked at the New York Times and didn't think consciously about building their network. So you had an opportunity and you took it, right? There's plenty of people who have the opportunity and don't recognize it. So like part of the process is to know, be smart enough to take it or to understand what's in front of you. So there's that. The other part of it is I have found a lot of people will go solo and then they try to like leverage their network. But the problem they face is they don't have access to the type of people that they need to. And I think you drew a through line between the network you had, the things you could do, and the people you wanted to sell to. And so access is huge. I mean, I've said this to literally every person on the show at this point because it's a theme that is so important. I can't unsee it, which is ask for what you want. The first thing you said was, I went to them and I asked, do you have any projects coming up? Talk to me about the things that what were you doing 10 years ago? I know that evolved into so much more stuff. So talk me through that and then the evolution of what you were doing.
Yeah, so in the early days, what I was mostly known for, and I did have a really good reputation because of the brands I was working with and the media companies I was at, was specifically what we called then native advertising. Now content is everywhere, like branded content is a thing. But at that point, most brands didn't have the talent in house to be making cool videos, doing articles. Like they didn't have content teams. And so they would go to publishers like the New York Times, like the magazines of Time Inc and ask our specialized teams to create it. So that was really my niche, not content in general, but really like working with media companies to co-create content. It was a very buzzy thing at the time, particularly in like 2012 to 2016 or 17. It was like every media company was starting one of these in-house agencies. It was a really big deal. So that's mostly what I focused on because that's what the market wanted at the time. I was doing mostly native ad consulting. I didn't do a lot of actual project creation, which I was doing at the media companies, but things like AARP, for example, was a client that I worked with for a while where they're saying, hey, we need to get more visibility. We're looking at what kind of publications have the right audience, an older audience for us to reach and what kind of content we should create. So I helped them come up with that hit list. The Hartford Insurance was another one. They were one of my clients for like 5 years. A contact I had from J School, same class as Ramona, that I reached out to, like, hey, I see you're doing marketing at the Hartford. Like, do you guys do any content, any projects that you're working on? And ended up working with them for almost 5 years, doing same thing, figuring out who should we partner with. They know, for example, that Travelers sponsors, a lot of golf tournaments. So they were like, well, what can we do with Golf Magazine to try to reach that audience, because they're also getting a lot of insurance messaging. So it was really just taking the same strategy work I was doing for those publications, but sort of turning around to the other side of the desk and saying, well, I'll help the brands go work with those people. I'll help them find out who to work with rather than being the person they work with on the other side. I did a lot of speaking because I had started to speak on behalf of my team at the New York Times and at Time Inc., like going to conferences and presenting our case studies. So I kind of just continued that work with a lot of the same folks where it's like, you've seen me speak before. Will you have me back? And now I don't have a full-time gig. So can you cover my travel? Can you give me a small stipend? Like building that stuff up. And I'll be totally honest with you, I did a whole lot of work I would never do again because I was starting out and figuring out what I wanted to do. Like I dabbled in ghostwriting. I helped a men's shoe brand run their Instagram for a while. Like I just did all kinds of random stuff, just kind of feeling out what was lucrative, what was worth my time, what was enjoyable, what the market wanted. And then just kind of tried to listen to that and tune in closer and closer over time.
I think too many people think that they have to have the thing all figured out before they do it. You went and did a bunch of stuff and you decided, is this going to work for me or not? And some things did and some things didn't. And that's kind of the point. The only way to know if you do or don't want to run social for a men's shoe company is to go run social for a men's shoe company.
I did continue to do some of that stuff up until probably like 2020 or 2021, but it was really because I would choose the brands that I would enjoy it. The men's shoe brand wasn't really a fit for me. I didn't know enough about men's fashion. I couldn't relate to Wall Street bros who are our target audience. But I did end up running social for a fantasy football app for almost 4 years. And I'm sure to this day that the tens of thousands of dude bros that I was dude broing it up with had no idea that it was me behind that was trash talking them and, criticizing their draft picks and stuff. Cause it was just a lot of fun. Like it was actually fun for me to do.
How did all of this become the content fuel framework and eventually prove it? Like, how did you go from this work to author?
The native stuff, like I did that for a while. That was really a lot of what I was doing. And then, like I said, dabbling in some of the other stuff. But the phrase native advertising kind of went out of fashion as more content marketing became the term we were using for content as a whole. And so I had a very deliberate strategy. I didn't want to be cornered as like she's the native ad girl and like we're done with native ads. So I started very consciously using broader terms, talking about content that was in other places, not just on media company properties. I was speaking at Content Marketing World at the time. So the following year, I pitched something that had nothing to do with native, but was adjacent enough that I had authority to talk about it. So it was an intentional process of like, I saw the writing on the wall that native ads were, as
Mhm.
a shiny object, were falling out of favor and pivoting because the stuff I do works, whether you're on your personal blog or whether you're a company blog or whether you're doing native ads. So intentionally pivoting to be more broad and talking about branded content, content marketing. And that's really where the stuff for Content Fuel Framework came from. It was not so much a conscious decision, like I'm going to write a book and I came up with Content Fuel Framework. It was more I was giving presentations and running workshops with the content of that book as part of what I was teaching. And people were like, why is this not in a book? Like, do you have a leave behind? Do you have an ebook? And I was like, that's actually a really good point. Like, I should probably do that because I already have all the IP. I just didn't assemble it like in that format. It came out of the fact that I was already teaching that stuff and I wanted it to be available to a broader audience at a more accessible price point because, the average small business or student is not going to be able to afford like a full day workshop the way a big brand would. So I was trying to democratize the information a little bit.
How has writing a book changed things for you and your business, or has it?
The book itself did not create change as a single entity. Like the book did not make me rich, the book did not make me famous, but as a business tool, it worked really well. So, understanding the role that you want that book to play before you write it is really important. Like I said, I already knew that the Content Fuel framework was not going to be a bestseller list. It was not going to be on the shelves of Barnes and Noble. Like content was not quite what it was now. I thought it would be more of a niche thing that would just kind of serve a specific audience of content marketers. And so I wrote it with the intention of it being a resource that was going to be used and with the plan to sell it on the back of my workshops. So the idea being if the company's bringing me in to train 500 people, hopefully they'll buy 500 copies so that each of their employees leaves with one. Or, conference, same thing. Maybe they buy 100 for their VIPs or, something like that. So I always saw it as like an instrumental revenue option. Maybe I'll get a couple extra $100 on top of it by selling some books. But it also is an authority thing. Like honestly, being able to say that you're an author, that you've written a book, whether anyone ever reads the book or even knows what it's called, it does bring some credibility with it. People assume that there's at least enough barrier to entry to writing a book, even if you self-publish, that you've gotten some recognition for that. So with Content Fuel Framework in particular, it was really well received. It has a lot of great reviews, got endorsements from some great folks, well respected in the industry. So it worked well for credibility, which while it's hard to quantify on like I got this deal or this client because of the book, I'm sure it contributed to sort of the overall trajectory and growth.
When you apply for speaking gigs or when they're considering people for gigs, especially I think when you're speaking,
Yeah.
it's like, well, the person with the book probably has a leg up, I would imagine. But I think there's this idea of getting a book deal that especially a lot of solos want these days compared to like, and I think Content Fuel Framework was self-published, but Prove It was a hybrid, I think.
I worked with the same hybrid
Okay.
publisher for both. Yeah. For anyone not familiar, hybrid publishing is basically you're hiring professional book people to make your books. So it's all the benefits of self-publishing and that you get to own all your IP, which was really important to me. I didn't want someone telling me that the content fill framework should only have 7 formats in it. Like this is my IP. I want it how it is. But it does cost up front. You're paying this team to do the producing, to get it on Amazon, to do all this stuff. So yeah, it's not a book deal in like the traditional sense people think of, like getting a big advance or something like that.
Yeah, and I think to some extent that is more impactful. Like you get to keep your IP and it gets to be
Yeah.
what you intended it to be.
It's also, like I said, an acknowledgement of what the book is. Like a traditional publisher is only going to get behind a book if they believe it can sell like an extraordinary amount of copies, which, you can still do self-published. Can still sell a lot, if you're doing good marketing, but I knew that no publisher was going to look at the swaths of all the books being published on like, all these bestseller lists and think Content Fuel Framework's going to compete with those. It wouldn't. And I knew that. So it was never going to be a good fit for that model. But for what I was doing, that's great. When I sell books for a speaking gig, it's not the publisher making money, it's me. I'm selling my own books. That model worked well for what that book was going to be.
You're solo for like 7-ish years, and then you decide to partner with Jay to create the Creator Kitchen. What was the decision to partner with somebody on a long-term project like that?
Like I mentioned before, we met at a speaking dinner and just like bonded over the fact that we were former journalists working in marketing. We share a lot of values about what we think content should and shouldn't be. And so we just got along really well. And truth be told, early pandemic, we were on the upward trajectory. We were ready to become like the next generation of content marketing speakers, on the heels of the greats, Anne Henley and Jay Baer and all the amazing speakers that we all like love and look up to. And then the pandemic hit and the entire speaking industry got turned upside down. And so for both of us, we felt stunted. Like we were on the way. It was like about to be our time. We both had just come out with books. It was like, yes, like we're about to make it big. And then everything came crumbling down. Honestly, it was like talking about the state of speaking, the state of being a creator, what our struggles were. It just became really clear that we were both looking for a way to serve on a more one-to-one level. Like we want to work directly with creators and find other folks who care like we do about quality over just quantity, just like flooding the market with stuff, which, was pre AI boom, but is extra prescient now. It really is about quality in our mind and not quantity. So that's a long-winded way to say of it's almost like the idea just sort of organically came to be. It was less of like a let's do a formal proposal, it was just really clear we were super aligned. Jay was a little further along in trying to set up sort of a group coaching membership type site. I kind of hopped on with his head start on that and we just kind of kept things moving forward. And the most important thing I think is we did due diligence on one another before partnering as if we had never met because we were like, we're friends. And you can be blinded by that and think, like, oh, it'd be so cool to work together and not think it through. Like, we interviewed people that we each other had worked for, like, talked to our former colleagues, looked for references, interviewed each other. Like, it was a really in depth process, probably over the course of like 3 months to decide if it made sense for us to work together in that way and not ruin the fact that we actually liked each other.
I've heard partnerships fall apart for all the reasons, for all the things that you worked hard to prevent. Like I'd never heard of people going through and doing these types of interviews and talking to former colleagues and figuring out like we both see the world through a similar lens and we both like have similar aspirations, but to go through the steps to actively try to figure out if it's a good fit is something that I haven't heard of people doing. So on the inside of the kitchen, it feels like you complement each other really well in terms of like you have overlapping skill sets, but you also have very different skill sets. I think it's just like a lesson because a lot of people ask me about should I partner with somebody to build something? Maybe a partnership could be good, but it just kind of all depends. And I think the way that the overlapping and complementary skill sets works really well for the space that you're in.
That was a huge part of it, honestly. Like part of that diligence process was we had really in-depth conversations about like how do you communicate? We know each other as friends. I know what kind of memes you think are funny, but like if we're going to have a serious discussion, like what does that look like for you? What do you like to use email for? Are you a Google Calendar person or are you like ride with the wind, like go with the flow? What kind of activities and tasks and processes and projects light you up and what suck the life out of you and make you miserable? We were really lucky that the more we talked about those things, the more it became clear that like the exact things that Jay loves to do are the things that I don't love as much, and vice versa. The things that drain him of energy are the things that I enjoy doing. And then again, we have this overlap in like we love to speak, we love to teach, we love to facilitate conversations. So our weaknesses are accounted for by the other person's superpowers, and we share values and like communication style. I think that honestly is probably the most important part is like understanding communication because this is a person you're going to be talking to about everything for everything all hours of the day, like on vacation. It's really important to understand how to handle that without it getting out of hand. You have to be able to be open and honest and be vulnerable and have those conversations for a partnership to actually work.
I like that you talk about each other's superpowers. When I first got in the kitchen, you had just recently written or like just posted something about your own superpower. And I remember reading your newsletter. I wrote you a note. I was like, I can't relate to your story directly, but like I relate to a lot of what you're talking about here. And I think you wrote a line that was just like, I'm unwittingly rebranding textbook hyperfixation as a career choice. And I was like, this is me. And I think rebranding it from like a handicap to a superpower was like one of the things that you and I first talked and like kind of created a friendship over. And so like talk a little bit about how you kind of discovered what I consider is your superpower and how all that came into focus for you.
The superpower we're talking about is I was diagnosed as autistic about 4 years ago. I'm in my 30s, like, that's not the kind of thing you expect to learn at that particular age, but it explained a lot of things for me, and it put a lot of things into focus, and it allowed me to better understand my mind and the way it works. So both my books are incredibly structured, for example. They have a visual framework associated with them, and I now understand that that's because I think in pictures in a way that other people don't. I hear information, I'm visually putting it in relation to other information. That's one of the things that it has always been a strength for me. And, it's something that I can harness it, a little more intentionally. And same is true for the hyperfixation. I call myself in the introduction like a forever student. And that's really core to who I am. I am always learning in a way that I know is very uncool to say, but like my hobbies are reading and watching documentaries. Like I'm always just learning more because I feel like it gives me more context for things. So yeah, you could see that as like you're single-minded, you hyperfixate, you have limited interest, right? Or in my case, I'm trying to see it as a strength. It's something that allows me to have the context and information I need to help my clients, to help other creators. So it is definitely a mindset shift of consciously trying to understand those powers, those skills, and also recognizing that like it's not the same for everybody, but fully understanding that there are other people who have been diagnosed as autistic who are not experiencing it the same way, who are finding it to interfere with their daily life or, to prevent them from being able to do the things that they want to do. So it's been a really interesting exploration of not only trying to understand my experience as an autistic woman, but understanding what other autistics experience, their lives, their perspectives, and seeing how those things connect and how I can use the platform that I have to be helpful for that experience in any way. It's so cool for me that we're having this conversation right now and like can talk about this openly because there was a time shortly after I got my diagnosis where I wasn't sure if I should be open about it, if I should talk about it, if it would hurt my business to admit that this is how I am. This is what makes me tick. And so, like, me from 2 years ago would be super hella proud right now of just the fact that I have embraced this part of who I am and, like, just been open about it?
It's good perspective because what we call as a superpower is cannot show up the same way for some people. But I think being able to talk about it and figure it out is also part of the process. Like, so I alluded to this idea that it's changed your business. So, in some of the things that you choose to work on, especially as it relates to your book, so like talk about you've really dug into this. You've hyperfixated on it. Like you've dug into this with purpose and intentionality. It's like you've been able to dig into this in a way that has amplified your business and given you not like a competing direction, but like something that feels even more impactful and meaningful than helping marketers market.
It's something that I have struggled with, right? It's like at the end of the day, I always think of like if the internet shut down tomorrow, do I have any skills to survive on this earth? Like, and marketing can, at least for me, feel very existential at times. Like it's all made up, it's all theoretical. Like I do find myself craving sometimes more of a tangible impact, whether that's like through hobbies where I work with my hands, like quilting or, things like that, or through this new work, which is the more I looked into autism and understanding, honestly, my core question was like, why the hell did I get to the age that I was without anyone knowing, understanding, or supporting me? There are so many things I can look back on and know that my life could have been different in amazing ways had I had the support I needed by knowing that I was autistic. And I'm blessed. I'm in a wonderful place in life and I own that. But just little things, like I struggled with math throughout my life, and it was always one of those things, if you only applied yourself, if you only tried harder, you're not doing the work and you're like, you have no idea how hard I'm trying. I'm crying. Like I'm trying so hard. Like maybe I'm not dumb, maybe my mind works in a different way and it's having trouble grasping abstract information, which is what was happening. It's made me realize that if I can help other women discover this about themselves sooner in some way, that I can meaningfully improve people's lives. And we did the math in one of our office hours. You and I were chatting about this, right? We were talking about, based on the current estimates, that 80% of women are not diagnosed with autism by the time they're 18, meaning women who actually have autism, people like me, make it to age 18 and still haven't been diagnosed, which essentially means they won't. They're done with school, they're done with counselors, they're done with testing, they're not going to encounter that experience. And some math shows us that there are at least 8 million undiagnosed autistic women in just the United States, which means in my mind, there's 8 million women out there who maybe are trying to start their own business or have a family or make it through school or whatever else. And they're being told that they're stupid or lazy or not applying themselves or anxious or dramatic or whatever other thing they're being called. And if only they and everyone around them understood that they were autistic, they could probably be much more happy and successful in the way that they define as successful, instead of measuring against, a yardstick that doesn't belong to them.
The yardstick that doesn't belong to them. Like, there's a lot of ways to define success, and it doesn't have to look like be good at math.
Right. Well, and even for me, like we talked about this, like I struggle with social media, like just blips of information is really difficult for me. I crave context, I crave depth. And so I have a hard time seeing little bits of things in passing because I want to hyperfixate. I want to know everything about that thing, not just one little bit, right? And I also struggle to share information that way. So that's why for me, having my newsletter, the Late Diagnosed Diaries, where I get to go in depth on a topic related to this, on a subtopic related to autism in women, and really dive in and hyperfixate for a while, I've learned to accept that I am not a person who creates volume frequently. I am a person who creates depth infrequently. And I'm okay with that. There was a time where I would beat myself up for not posting to LinkedIn every day. I should be posting to threads. I should be doing all these things. And I'm like, that's not where my strength lies. I'm not serving myself and my strengths. My way to communicate is to go deep, and that requires time. And so learning to love and accept that about yourself, like, speaking of the yardstick, that's transformative.
I'm like speechless because I feel like the level of impact that this had on you. I hope that this book, and I'm confident that this book is going to be able to reach, even if it reaches one person, right, is going to be meaningful. So, aside from the kitchen and writing this book, where are you at right now? Like, how are you building this business? What's next? What's right now?
So I think, sort of in keeping with the same philosophy I talked about early on, of like looking what is the market looking for and trying to follow that. I'm trying to do the same thing now. I feel very much like I've sort of reinvented my business post pandemic, that it doesn't look like what it did before the pandemic at all, but in the best possible way. Like running the kitchen with Jay has been so fulfilling. Like the work that we get to do with the creators is so life giving and like energy producing. I'm focused more on the projects that make me feel that way, which is, again, a privilege that I'm in a place where I can say no to certain projects to leave room and space for the things that do give me life. Among those, I love educating. A lot of what I do is driven by education. And I've been working with LinkedIn Learning. I'm now one of their contracted professors for LinkedIn Learning. So, or the instructors, they call it. But they have contracted me to create courses. And that involves learning a lot about a subject, going in depth, writing the video scripts. And then every couple months, I fly out there, hop in front of a set with a teleprompter, and perform the course to be recorded. No one's going to see anything for months that I've been working on these things, right? And then they're out in its depth infrequently. But I found it so fulfilling. I have a course out already on the basics of using storytelling in your marketing. The next course to come out will be Chat GPT for content marketers. So, like, specific use cases and applications for folks who write content. And then there will be another one on content repurposing coming out either late this year or early next year. So That's been a lot of fun. So in addition to the kitchen and working on a book proposal for this topic of why women aren't diagnosed with autism until late in life and what that means for us, this courses have been kind of a real rhythm to the last year or so.
This is probably the most unconventional revenue diversity that I've heard of. Like a lot of people build the more traditional, like build a course yourself, like write a book, build a course, offer services, more traditional things. And I like that you have found different ways to monetize your expertise and follow your different in all these different ways. And a lot of people wouldn't allow themselves to write that book.
Part of that, truthfully, is like the hyperfixation and like strong sense of justice are like some of the hallmark characteristics of autism, particularly in women. And so that book's getting written, whether a publisher does it or not, or whether I have to like lock myself in a room for a week and do it. It is so important to me and it feels so necessary that I am going to make it happen. So whether it's good for the business or not, whether it's, serving my business model, I don't know. I couldn't tell you, but I have followed my instinct about what I care about and what lights me up. So far, it has not failed me.
I don't think it could. Like, I think we tell ourselves this story that if it doesn't all just line up so perfectly, that it's not worth doing. And I think that's just, you can give yourself permission to do other things that fill your cup.
Oh, 100%. And I think a big part of the being okay with that, we've had conversations about this in the kitchen, you and I even specifically, like, I don't know how it's going to impact my business. I will have to watch and see. I will have to see if, who knows, 3 years from now, maybe I'm only speaking about autism. Like, I have no idea where my business will take me. Actually, the founder of the Content Marketing Institute, Joe Pulizzi, who is obviously like the content marketing guy, wrote a murder mystery novel. That to me was like, I love that you did that and then wrote another marketing book. And it's like, yeah, I did that. I wrote a murder mystery book.
He didn't sell any less marketing books.
Right. Has like since exited a company related to content creation. Like he's
Yeah,
good. That to me was like a great market signal. Now I'm not him, obviously, but it was like that inspiration of, you know what? It doesn't all have to be part of the business model. Like if you have the resources to do it and you have the drive and the passion that this is something you want to do, like that can be so creatively fulfilling that gives you energy to put back into the other stuff.
totally. I didn't really think about how that can produce energy to fuel the other programs.
Heck yeah. Because after this conversation, I'm going to be so hyped. I'm so hyped talking about this stuff. I'm probably going to be way more productive afterward. And that's true when you get to talk about your passions, you get to do the things you love. Like it does light you up and that carries over, even just being happier and more fulfilled.
You mentioned it's like, if the internet goes down, do I have like anything of importance? Like, can I do anything? It's like, I've had a lot of people come on this show and say things like, yeah, I was just selling sales technology to other salespeople, or I'm just marketing to other marketers. Like, everyone feels very stuck in this like OODA loop. And they're like, I'm not sure what to make of all of it. And sometimes it just can feel very meaningless sometimes. That work needs to be done, and there's nothing wrong with doing that work, but it's like you said, to find that thing and use that to light you up is totally valid, and more people should give themselves permission to do it.
You've heard me say it several times. Like, I recognize what a blessed position I'm in. Like, I am safe. I have all kinds of privileges. I am in a place where I can take these kinds of risks. But I also know that a lot of autistic women in particular, they don't have the resources or the ability to speak in front of a crowd. That might not be something they're comfortable with. They may not have the platform. And so early on, when I was trying to decide if I was going to pursue this direction, like part of it was I felt almost a level of responsibility. I am in a place where I've written books before. I'm comfortable doing that. I speak in front of crowds. I'm comfortable doing that. I have a reputation that can sustain, hopefully. So it feels like to not do it would not be in service of the people that I now know are my community. I feel like it's an opportunity that I would be irresponsible to ignore, that I have a chance to help by using the skills and the privileges that I have?
I find it totally acceptable to recognize the fact that, like, hey, you have started this journey 10 years ago and you've been working at it and going after it for a really long time. It's okay to recognize that a lot of work went in to getting to this point where all of these things converged at really the right time. Like you figured this thing out. You also happen to be a speaker and an author, and you're like, I have the means, the ability to shine a light on this thing. Now you feel this sense of responsibility to do it. And because you can, and like, that's okay. You have permission to do it. Looking back on all the stuff that you've done over these last 10 years, what's something you would have done differently?
I probably wouldn't have launched my first book in late February of 2020 had I known what was coming in March of 2020. That I would have to cancel all my speaking engagements and the whole book tour and stuff. But I think I would have charged more sooner. I think I struggled a lot more in those early years than I needed to because, as I talked about the money mindset thing, it felt weird to charge what would have been a month or 2 months salary for a single project. It just felt uncomfortable, and I think I undervalued myself a lot early on, and if I could go back and, like, shake the shoulders of, 2015, 16 Melanie who was starting out, I would have been like, "You up your prices right away."
We're all in that same boat, and to some respect, I think pricing is this like weird thing that everyone feels like they don't charge enough, but they don't know how to charge more. It also sets you up to feel confident in what you can do. What do you want to build now, or what do you want to build that you haven't built yet?
I love what we're doing with the kitchen. I love the community we're creating that's, like, focused on creativity and craft and, like, the quality of the work that we do. I would really love to be able to build it bigger and be able to serve more people because I think there are a lot of creators who would benefit, especially solopreneurs, like having a community of people who get it, who can give you advice, who can just listen to the struggles that we all share. I'm excited to see how we can scale it without losing the sort of special sauce that makes it what it is.
Is there something that has prevented you from scaling it, or are you saying that's the goal? Like, how are you thinking about growing the kitchen?
That is the goal. So Jay and I have been working sort of in the background for the last couple months on what we are calling the Kitchen 2.0, sort of the new breaking out new membership tiers to give different levels of access to things, revamping the way we deliver content. We recently launched a members only podcast, which is something we were wanting to do for a while. So we don't have a team, we don't have employees, it's just the two of us. And so that's probably the biggest limiter is like how much can we do on our own just as two humans who also are responsible for keeping other humans alive. We're looking at different avenues for how we could do that. And we're hoping that by later this year and early next year that we'll be able to serve a lot more creators more easily based on the different things that we're implementing.
That's cool. I think there's like 60 of us in there now. What is your vision? Whether or not you've told Jay this number, like, what's just like, what do you think? 1,000 people, 10,000 people? Like, what do you think?
As the vision is right now, 10,000 sounds insane. 1,000 seems doable. I think 1,000 could work. I think that's really what we're trying to figure out is what we don't want to do is just sell a bunch and fill it up with people and not be able to serve them well. So at least for me as a person who's very tangible in my thinking, it's hard for me to pick a goal without seeing the pathway there. But part of what we're doing in breaking out different membership tiers is can we make something at a more entry level that is more scalable, that the quality doesn't diminish as more people come in, and then have these additional layers that might have smaller membership of higher tiers that have more direct access, that we do the things that don't scale well. So that's what we're trying to figure out. And I think it does involve restructuring our more like entry level standard membership to make it something that scales without quality loss. That's what we're working on now.
I have faith. You guys have been really open about sharing what the first year of the kitchen really looked like, and where we're at now, and what the direction you're trying to take it. It's really exciting to watch you go through that process. It's exciting to be in there and do the work. I mean, this show is a product of the kitchen. I'm very excited about, and it's made an impact on my life and my business, and it's been a ton of fun to do so and be a part of there. And I've met a ton of people. Like I met Renee, who I interviewed on this show, in the kitchen. So there's a lot of good that comes, that is like the digital sawdust of the existence of the kitchen, not even just the work, the direct work that you're doing, but all the stuff that surrounds it, which has been really cool to be a part of.
That's the coolest part to me. I mean, yeah, it's a business. We gotta like make it make sense for the finances. But for me, that is really the coolest part. We call all of our members chefs, but like when I see chefs interacting in the wild, like Renee being on your show, I'm like, we played a part in that. Or I help somebody with a framework that is the basis for their book. And I'm like, oh my God, like I helped them form those ideas. And now those ideas, they're gonna get to put those out in the world and like share their message, getting to see the fallout of that, the ripple effect is so cool. And I think that's also why we are thinking, well, how do we make more of that? How do we make that magic scale so that it's not just 60 of us doing awesome things, but maybe like 600 of us could do awesome things?
The focus on maintaining impact is key because I think the two of you could certainly fill it up with 1,000 people pretty easily. It's not a reach problem, right? It's like, how do you do the thing and still maintain that level of impact where people can come in there and work out a framework that is the thesis of their next book, or work out the premise of a show that they really love to create, and all those things. So it's exciting to watch the evolution of it. I'm glad to be there. So
We're trying to practice what we preach. We always talk about how it's about quality over quantity. So yeah, we could just get 1,000 members and pad our bank accounts, but that's not what we're here for. Like we're trying to focus on quality and the benefit, the impact. And to do that, sometimes you got to do it a little bit slower. That's what we're doing. We're really focused on making sure that the relationships and the impact stay there as we move through our scale process, hopefully.
and I can confirm that I was not paid to say any of these things about the kitchen. There was no compensation. I'm not getting a free membership.
None. We
Just
don't we
in,
don't we don't have budget like that.
yeah, that's it.
For compensation.
Mel, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story. And I know more people feel seen because of it. This has been a blast.
Thanks for letting me share my story. And thanks for being part of the kitchen.
Hey, Nick again, and thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the 1000 Routes newsletter, where I process the insights and stories you hear on this show into frameworks and lessons to help you build a new and different future for your own business. You can sign up at 1000routes.com or check the link in the show notes. Here's the hardest hitting question you're going to be asked all day, probably all month. What would be your last meal on earth?
Last meal on earth would probably be Panera mac and cheese and mint chocolate chip ice cream. Not the healthiest, but I'm going out. I'm going down in style.
No one has answered with like a salad. I don't think every time I've asked that question, no one has opted for health conscious. So I love it. Would you go bread bowl or no?
Probably not bread bowl because I want to save room for the ice cream, and the bread bowl kind of filling, so I'll probably save space.
Well, you get a side of bread no matter what, I suppose.
That's true.